Thank you, Kofi, for joining us in this podcast called Rain in You. I am very excited to host you today. I have some set of very interesting questions that I hear a lot of teenagers and young adults ask, and I hope from your experience and from your answers, they get a lot of clarity.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for having me on the channel.
Okay, so we'll start. Kofi, a little bit about you. If you can explain yourself, introduce yourself.
Sure, my name is Kofi. I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when I was an adult. I was actually 20 or 21 when I was diagnosed. It was at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So I kind of had a lot of stress at the time surrounding that too, because I was in school, I was in law school. I had worked so hard to get to law school, and then I was diagnosed with autism, so it was kind of a lot to digest. But also, my special interests are art and animals. So I have a couple of animals that I love very much. I have two rabbits. Their names are Cinnamon and Ginger. And I do a lot of artwork. I like to draw and paint. And I also really like music. So that's a bit about me.
That's a lot that you love to do and a lot of talent that you have.
Thank you.
Okay, you just mentioned you got to know that you were autistic maybe around 2021. So, how did you first come to understand that you were autistic?
Well, I had actually studied psychology in college, so I knew a little bit about autism, but honestly, it didn't go into depth. Otherwise, I would have immediately recognized it and identified with it. So when I was in law school, I became very, very burnt out. I had graduated from undergrad 2 years early. So I was working so hard in school. And when I got there, if you can imagine, law school it's very stressful, even for a neurotypical. So for me, it was so much. I was burnt out. And when I went to see a therapist, actually a psychiatrist, I went to see a psychiatrist, and she said that she thinks that I may be on the spectrum. And when I went home to look at the criteria in the DSM-5, I just immediately identified with it. And when I looked at the criteria and I tried to explain to her the things that I deal with, the sensory issues, which never made sense because even growing up, my family members would say, like, oh, she has just a little quirks. Like, you know how Kofi is. She's just quirky. She just has her little oddities about things. She's just smart. That's just how smart people are. But really, there was a lot of suffering going on as well because without my diagnosis or even just realizing that I'm autistic, I had no idea how to take care of myself and how to prevent burnout.
So, what challenges did you face at that time? Or did you actually face challenges in those 21 years that you were just trying to mask? Like people say that women who are neurodiverse mask it very well. Was that the case with you?
Oh, yes, very much so. Thank you for bringing up masking. Masking is a huge topic being studied today because of how many women are going undiagnosed into adulthood. Ideally, I would have been diagnosed as a child. My pediatrician, every time my mother would bring it up, some things I would do, like, this is so gross, but when I was a little kid, I used to eat only one thing at a time. Like I would have my one food and I would just eat that for a very long time. And my one food at the time was ketchup sandwiches. So for some reason, I liked ketchup sandwiches. I would just eat ketchup between two slices of bread. And my mom brought it up to the pediatrician. And he was like, "Oh, she's just very smart. Like she's just very quirky." And since I wasn't disruptive in class, they didn't search any further.
Mhm.
So it's always, if you're not a problem for other people, you can always go undiagnosed. You can slip through the diagnostic net because I was great in school, but I would have so much anxiety, and I remember growing up, the anxiety that I experienced was so overwhelming, and particularly socially. And it seemed to get worse during my teen years because there were so many expectations to socialize in high school and things like that. But I always stuck with my special interests, and that seemed to help. Like art really, like art really helped because I was able to express myself without all of the rules that I think society expects from us that a lot of neurodivergent people don't adhere to. But I did have a lot of difficulty, especially with my sensory issues. Like when I was very small, my parents used to say that I would have issues with socks because of the seam. The seam, if it fit over my foot a certain way, I would have like a meltdown. I would have be so uncomfortable and I would have to either take them off or move it so that it would be correct. So socks were always a big deal. What else can I think of? In the bathtub or bath water, it always had to be room temperature. Like I could not have a hot bath like everybody else. And it would be either be room temperature or cold. And as well as my food could not be hot. I was so sensitive to heat at the time. So I had a lot of temperature regulation issues. Sometimes I can't tell nowadays when it's too hot. Like a couple months ago, I was taking a shower and I couldn't tell that it was too hot and I actually fainted. Yes, and then my mother, she was there at the time and she found me on the floor. She's like, I heard a loud noise. Like, what happened? And I had never fainted before, so I was very confused. But that's an example. So now I have to shower with the door open because I can't tell when it's too hot for me. Um, as far as growing up, I did have a lot of social issues. I kind of didn't really understand the things that people did or why they did them, especially in conversation. I was always very quiet and to myself, and I would just kind of focus on what I was interested in and not much else.
Okay.
Um,
So, Kofi, when you were growing up, and you were, let's say, a picky eater, didn't your parents say that, oh, she's just a picky eater, she just wants to eat ketchup and bread, or she's just fussy. Let's not adhere to what she's saying because then she's going to be even more adamant. Did you go through all that? Because nobody was understanding that you were on the spectrum.
Oh yes, it was very much of this. She's just quirky. She has these odd little things that she does.
Yeah.
No one ever thought that, oh, this is an actual disorder, like she's on the autism spectrum, because I think that they already had a preconceived notion of what autism looked like or how it presented. It's not always like autism doesn't have a look. People think that before they know anything about autism, they think that like, oh, you don't look autistic. Like, but
Yeah.
that's not a thing.
Yeah. That's not a thing. So, how can parents or caregivers at home um, understand autism instead of accepting it to be the fussiness of the child or the quirkiness of the child?
I think that maybe they could try to have a conversation with them about the way that they might feel internally, because externally, no one knew I was suffering. But really, I just had so much anxiety, and because I was so reserved or I didn't make a lot of facial expressions and never complained, they just assumed that I was not suffering in any way. So, and that child may have difficulty communicating their feelings, as even a lot of autistic adults struggle with. But I think that it would be really worth it to just sit down with your child and ask how they feel about different things or why they do the things they do. Like me not having hot food. If
Yeah.
they would have investigated that, they would have discovered that I had an issue with all hot things, and that that's
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
unusual.
How about school? So have you joined any job right now?
Joined any jobs?
Yeah. Are you working at a place right now?
I am, yes. I have worked at a law firm and but now I'm working at online legal document review.
Got it.
So I'm working with that while I study for the bar because it's kind of a calmer work environment and it's remote. So it's very nice and convenient for me
Yeah.
and to be able to study around that schedule.
So the reason I ask is, so what are some changes workplaces can implement to make the surrounding more inclusive for neurodiverse people?
Um, I think that it would be really nice if they had a little area for neurodivergent people or everyone to decompress. Some places have a sensory room. This doesn't have to be quite like a sensory room. It could be just a quiet room that autistic people have access to. Because I know when I'm overwhelmed, I just need to decompress where I am in a place that is quiet and probably low lighting for when I'm overstimulated. But I think that if it's not a whole room for autistic people to provide, they can make earplugs available for when it's loud so that we can concentrate. They can provide, what else could they do? It would be nice if they could make it feel safe to be neurodivergent because that's mostly what I've been struggling with.
Got it. How about schools? I mean, if you have any memory of your school time, do you think some one or two changes that you would recommend every school should do to make it more easy
Hmm.
for any neurodiverse child?
I think it would be nice if teachers could really understand what autism is, if they could be aware of many teachers know what ADHD is and some of the symptoms of it, but not everyone knows about autism. And I feel like even most people don't know a lot about autism. When I was in school, no one ever
No.
suspected, no teachers ever suspected that I had autism, even though I did weird things because I wouldn't interrupt and I wasn't very disruptive. So they kind of just overlooked all of my quirks.
Yeah.
If they could make it feel safe to be autistic as well, that would be amazing. And if they could do that by providing STEM toys, I think it would be nice because even STEM toys can help someone to concentrate. Not everyone has to be sitting still in their seat. That's what a lot of teachers expect as well. They want you to be like, let's say I'm taking a test. If I'm
Mm.
bouncing my leg, as long as it's not making noise and disrupting others, that's okay. I don't have to be sitting still in the seat
Yeah.
all the time. Um, or they could provide passes to people who need to step out for a moment when they
Mm.
get overwhelmed. Like, oh, I can just feel free to step out into the
Mm.
hallway if I
Mm.
need something, if I need to gather myself. I think that would be really great because the pressure of being made to sit down in a chair for several hours is it's a lot, especially if you have autism or ADHD.
Yeah. Yeah. Good points. I think, yeah, very, very, very important points. Stemming especially, they should let them stem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How important do you think, in your opinion, is community? So, do you crave for a community? Do you have enough circle of friends? How do you do that? How do you manage that? What's your opinion?
Well, it's been very hard to do that. Once I realized that I was autistic and that I was masking, there was this, once you realize you're masking, it's a whole journey to unmasking, unraveling yourself and rediscovering yourself. So it's such a long process. And once you decompress and realize that you're masking, you start to discover yourself and you may discover that you've been masking around all of your friends. And your friends that you have around at that point in time, it may not be the best friends that you should have. They may not really understand the real you because you've been pretending to be someone else. Probably just to be accepted by community, because we do want that. We want to be connected with community. It's just that the way that a lot of neurotypicals have us do it can be overwhelming. For me, I make friends the best when I'm able to text with them through through my cell phone or have them on social media because when I type, it makes it a lot easier for me to
Yeah,
communicate what I
yeah,
mean. And when I'm speaking to
yeah,
someone, speaking is hard for a lot of us.
yeah,
And even when you try really hard, but I have finally gotten to the point a couple years later where I have friends around me who really understand who I am and accept me. And I've had friendships where they didn't accept me. I've had friendships where after I got diagnosed with autism, they didn't want to be my friend anymore.
mm,
And it's so heartbreaking. It just doesn't make
mm,
any sense because I'm the same person.
yeah,
But it's nice if not nice. It's a requirement really to
yeah,
be your friend if that person can accept autism and understand or
yeah,
even provide support. Like, what do you need when you're overwhelmed? Um, do you need anything? Is this area too loud? So sometimes my friends ask, is it too loud here?
mm,
At coffee shops or if we're in public and there's a loud noise because I really struggle with sounds
mm.
and my sensory issues.
Oh,
But
yeah,
really, having friends around you, even just a couple who can love and support you right, is amazing.
yeah.
It's just hard to find those people, but I think that it takes patience and
I'm sure a lot
really,
of patience. Yeah,
yes, it does take a lot of patience
yeah,
and trying to vet someone, so to speak, to figure out if they're a good person to be around.
yeah.
So
So
it can be very hard.
now when you have walked this journey, so what is that one thing that you wish everyone knew about being autistic?
I wish that they knew that autistic people aren't cold-hearted and they aren't mean. Sometimes people will think that you're mean, especially if you're on the autism spectrum and you're a person of color or a woman. People will think that, oh, she has an attitude. But maybe I'm just overstimulated. I wish people knew that so many things go on internally with us, even if we don't express them
Mm, mm,
outwardly. There's just so much going on beneath the
yeah,
surface.
yeah. How do you manage this, Kofi? So, what is that one best solution that helps you remain calm?
Probably stimming, or I think that when I get overwhelmed, even arm squeezes help. Sometimes if I have a loved one near me, I will ask them to squeeze my forearm because the pressure really calms me down. Some
Here
people use it on the forearm, so like
on the
this.
forearm. Okay.
Yeah, it's very comfortable for me. Or if you're an anxious person, it's really helpful. Something about the compression, the way that people
Okay.
use weighted blankets
Good. Oh, okay.
really helps. But also my journal helps as
Mm,
well, managing my emotions, because once you write them down, it can be so much easier to process. Because if you don't put them anywhere, if they just stay in your head, you really might not understand what's going on.
yeah. Commonly, when you look around, I mean, last these years, especially after you were diagnosed, what do you think is that one biggest misconception that people have in mind about autism?
In my specialty,
What kind of misconception people have that you have
oh,
come across about autism? Yeah.
misconception, I think that people think that autism has a look or
Mm,
that women or people of color cannot be autistic, which is absolutely absurd. But
mm,
people also tend to think that people on the autism spectrum cannot be intelligent. And that's probably the most disappointing misconception that people have about autism because there are so many brilliant, famously brilliant autistic individuals.
yeah. Coming back to one last question, relationships. So friends is one thing you said you have. It was tough for you. And then you figured out, and some people stood by relationships. So now, how do you think a neurodiverse person manages that or can manage that, or your experience in that?
Well, I think that when it comes to relationships, it can be very hard for autistic people to open up because of it may be because we're just scared, or it may be because we had a bad experience in the past, which happens to a lot of autistic people, especially autistic women. Sometimes dealing with neurotypical men can unintentionally fall prey to them, or and sometimes a lot of us have trauma because of that, but it's very hard to open up in relationships because of things like that. And it's hard to convey your emotions and communicate with your partner, assuming it's a romantic relationship or even in friendships as well, because sometimes we don't know how we're feeling either until much, much later when we've had time to
Okay,
think about it.
okay. Anything you would want to add, Kofi, that maybe I missed, but you have come across on a daily basis that you would want listeners to know?
I would just like people to know that it takes a lot for autistic people to do the average everyday things that neurotypicals do at times. If we have a task, sometimes it takes months to complete, even if the task only takes 5 minutes because of executive dysfunction and because it can be so hard to just get the tasks complete when we may have anxiety about it. So if they could just consider things like that when dealing with us, that would be great. I had a friend once who was all the time wanting to make last minute plans, and I was so happy to be invited, but it's just that I can't do last minute plans. Everything has to be planned in advance so that I can figure out what I need to bring, what I need to wear. All of these things that would be normal for a neurotypical person who could just get up and go. I need to essentially study and figure out how to
Mhm.
navigate that situation.
Mm. That's very interesting, actually. Yeah, I never thought of it. Kofi, this has been wonderful speaking with you, and I speak to a lot of young adults who are associated with our company. And I think this conversation with you that my team will also hear will help them understand those young adults better. And I'm sure many who will watch this will also um, feel more belonged and heard.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.